Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Focus Friday series with the KU Alumni Association's Student Alumni Network. My name is Michaela Sandifer, and I serve as the Director of Inclusive Programs and Talent Development. I'm excited to be your moderator for today's session titled Love Me or Leave Me, Healthy Relationships 101. As a quick reminder, Focus Fridays is a Student Alumni Network program series aimed at providing students with exposure to campus resources, community partners, and the voices of diverse leaders within our Jayhawk community. The Focus Friday series will continue to be offered virtually and will launch on each month's first and last Friday. Today, we are highlighting the Sexual Assault Prevention and Education Center, or SAPEC for short. SAPEC is a university resource center that promotes social change and the elimination of sexual violence through prevention, education, inclusive programming, and campus-wide collaboration. Today, we are excited to hear from Taylor Jones, who serves as the prevention educator with SAPEC. Taylor received her bachelor's degree in psychology from Ottawa University. She's a community advocate that has served with Americorps, and prior to joining KU, Willow Domestic Violence Center. There, she served survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and stalking through their emergency shelter. As a director of community services, she oversaw community-based programs, including court advocacy, rural advocacy, work program support, and peer support in the communities of multiple surrounding counties. She's also provided trauma-informed intervention services for those who batter as a group facilitator at Satori Counseling Services, bridging gaps in services for community members. Taylor has served in several capacities, including chair to the 4th District Community Corrections Advisory Board, Douglas County Resiliency Coalition, Douglas County Decriminalization Poverty Work Group, and Douglas County Coordinated Entry Group. Got a lot going on, Taylor. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was funny, you're listing some of that stuff off, and I'm like, ooh, I gotta check in. But it is a lot. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course. We are so excited to dive in and learn more about healthy romantic relationships. I will ask a question and then provide you space to respond. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's get started. First, can you talk to us about how you got involved in this line of work and what drew you to it?
Yes, so I actually went to a smaller school in Kansas. So it was definitely a different environment than you and I were used to growing up. By the time I got to college, I was going from like an 8A high school to just like a really small college in Kansas. But what actually ended up being a great opportunity for me at that smaller school was the different sorts of community partners that school was able to bring in, and all of the continuing education and just student outreach that was able to happen with those just smaller presentations and being able to foster stronger connections with those community partners. So one of those community partners ended up being the Willow Domestic Violence Center, where I ended up getting a position at. They would just come to our campus and talk about healthy relationships and really just put terms to concepts that really made sense to me at the time. It was just connecting a lot of dots for me and answering a lot of questions, even questions that I didn't even know that I had. And so I became just so interested that that was all I could think about for the rest of my studies there. That was exactly what I knew I wanted to do after I graduated, was either just shadow or get some sort of position with them. And so I did just that. And I was really glad that I took that opportunity and that they took a chance on me, because I was able to learn so much just about intimate partner violence and gender-based violence that essentially then just got me here into this space. I was able to collaborate with the University of Kansas a couple of times, but specifically with the Sexual Assault Prevention and Education Center. They had phenomenal people that worked in that building. And so I again wanted to attach myself to something great and to an organization that was having really meaningful and impactful and important conversations with folks, where I feel like that's kind of where I thrive, is getting to have those conversations. And again, they took a chance on me, and I'm here. So I'm really glad that it all worked out that way.
That's awesome. And you are how many months into your role?
I started in October.
Okay.
So still
Thank
kind
you.
of
Yeah.
fresh.
The
Yeah.
baby Jayhawk. Baby
Yes.
Jayhawk. We're excited.
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So, um, why is it important for us to talk about healthy relationships and specifically romantic ones today?
I would say relationships in general are hard, right? Are complicated, I would say, have a lot of layers to them, really entail a lot of different internal work and external work, right? So constantly trying to check in with ourselves about how we are feeling about things, how we are feeling about growing as people, right? I think essentially when we're talking about students, we're in one of the more kind of just layered pieces of our lives where just so much is happening with what we're learning and the amount of new environments that we're exposing ourselves to. All of these different things are coming into play, and we're learning about ourselves, right? And we're changing as a person. And so then how that then affects relationships, but then specifically romantic relationships, you are then constantly trying to have to figure out how to maneuver that with somebody else now. I and like a lot of different students maybe even come into school with a partner, right? Maybe they come into school with a partner from high school or first from somewhere else. And so to be going on that journey together, figuring ourselves out and figuring each other out, so many different things come into play. And that's why it's really important to be still constantly checking in and constantly checking in with each other and with ourselves to then ensure that we can have healthier relationships with each other. I think when we're not having those conversations, or we're not aware of the different ways that harm can be created through relationships, that likelihood then tends to increase. So I would say it's definitely important to just be talking about it in general, because I think a lot of students can benefit from it. A lot of alumni can benefit from it. I think when we get into the talks about legacy, right, and with folks who are then going to be having their own children maybe attend this school someday, what that's going to mean to be having that very important conversation that SAPEC is hoping that everyone is having this conversation, and it becomes a constant conversation, not just something that we're talking about in October for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, or not something that we're just talking about in April for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, that it is something that we're constantly checking in on.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think about when I was a freshman coming to campus, I had my high school boyfriend. And I just think to your point, there's so many relationships that you're navigating, both old and new, and it's layered and it's unfamiliar places and people. So definitely can kind of relate to that, and being able to identify what healthy relationships are, which kind of leads into my next question. So can you help us define both healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships?
Sure. So I usually like to start with unhealthy. I don't know why. I'm still trying to check in with myself about what that's about. So when I'm thinking of unhealthy relationships, we want to talk about there are a lot of there are a lot of just overarching or larger themes that are at play. So while some of these we may be thinking on an individual basis, a lot of these are most likely also inspired by just how we think as a culture, just how we think as a society, right? So when we're looking at unhealthy relationships, I firstly definitely start to think about possessiveness, and where does possessiveness come from, and or control, whether if that feels like in a very extreme way or in more of a subtle way. Either way, it could be happening. So possessiveness or control, even isolation through basically trying to pick away and pick at different supports and or people that are in that person's life that would be able to support them if they felt that that person was in a dangerous situation. The less people and the less connections that someone has, the more the stronger likelihood or the better outcome I may have to impose my will on them. If they don't have someone that's checking in or providing resources or doing any of those things, I'm able to then come in and then right, instill any sort of violence or control or abuse within that situation. Any sort of belittling or shaming that happens in a relationship, right? I think a lot of those stem from that overarching theme of just jealousy that we see a lot. Unfortunately, it's still really heavy and present in a lot of media, right? That we want that partner that is super jealous or that would get into a fight for us, to fight for our honor, or whatever that means for us. But then we can see how that sort of violence can then shift in a lot of different ways that we may not have intended initially. So again, not to our individual fault for thinking that way. As a collective, we think that way and celebrate some of those characteristics, but then they can potentially be dangerous when we're talking about unhealthy or toxic relationships. And then we want to talk about manipulation, betrayal, using privilege also, right? That's a big thing. And in what way or what sort of privilege can we be talking about? That can be relating to gender, that can be relating to sexuality and or comfortability with talking about sexuality, right? So someone one person in a relationship can be out, right, and comfortable with folks knowing that they're out, and they may be in a relationship with someone who is not. And so what then gets compromised or what's at risk when being in a relationship with someone who has that very sensitive information about someone to disclose to others without that other person's permission. So all of that to say what I think a healthy relationship is would be things that are just absent of that, right? So taking very sensitive or vulnerable information and being a safe person that your significant other can trust you with, right? If it doesn't mean that it is going to bring any harm to them or any harm to others, right? Being able to be trustworthy, being able to being able to be trustworthy, but also be like a safer space or be able to provide a safe space for, or a brave space for others. Healthy conflict, I feel like, is a big one. I think a lot of couples, and especially young couples, feel like I am only in a healthy relationship if we don't fight. Yeah, it's actually pretty concerning if there is a relationship where there is no fighting at all, no disagreements, everyone just thinks the exact same thing at the exact same moment. That likelihood is actually probably very low. So what that means to have healthy conflict, to be able to have a conversation where each person can come into a conversation or a situation and be able to explain and or give voice to their true feelings or their true thoughts, and have that be welcomed on the other side, and have that other person be intuitive about that, right? Tell me more about that. What are some ways that we can address that as a unit, and being responsible for ourselves as individuals, right? Because and we definitely want to be responsible for ourselves as individuals and be able to regulate our own emotions, regulate our own thoughts, and then be able to come together in a relationship that doesn't feel like we are each other's halves, right? We can come into this relationship as two wholes and that be okay. Equality, kindness, equity, all of the things I would say then go into a healthy relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think the communication piece, I think, is huge, because I do think that people tend to believe or feel that if we agree on everything, then things will be fine. But there usually is something lost in that. And I think one of the things that I've kind of learned as I've continued to grow and develop in my own relationships is that my partner may or may not have the same communication style with me, most likely not. And so how do we kind of work through that in a healthy way, where we both feel heard, but also walk away feeling like, I don't know, good and safe in the space.
Mhm.
So I think that's
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah, and no one had to win, right? I think
Yeah.
that's a thing
Mhm.
too, is we definitely treat relationships or treat conflict like war a lot. So there
Yeah.
has to be a winner and there has to be a loser, and I have to be right. You have to say you were wrong. And then, yeah, that creates sort of just like a lot of additional layers there that don't have to be, for sure, for
Yes.
sure.
No, that's great. So you mentioned coming into relationships and being two wholes instead of coming in and looking for your other half. So that kind of leads into my next question, which is if you could talk to us a little bit about self-care and the role that that plays in either healthy or unhealthy relationships.
Mhm. I love, I feel like all of the different sort of corny or like cliche sayings come to mind at this point, but they're so true, right? One of the ones that sticks out to me right now is this from coming from the space of you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you are not either, if you're not in a space where you are taking care of yourself in different sorts of capacities, right? It then becomes really complicated and really hard to be as present as you want to be in a relationship. And not to say that folks with struggles or different things going on their plates don't deserve to be in relationships. We can do that. It just how we navigate through relationships and how we are able to communicate about what's going on with us and what our plan is for our self-care is really important when talking about relationships, but then specifically healthy relationships, right? Because once we are starting to feel depleted or we find some deficits, we can find ourselves quickly. Again, relying maybe on someone else to then try to fulfill those deficits, right? And then what sort of how do I want to call this? What sort of like resentment maybe do we then build, or maybe what resentment does another person build once we feel like someone is not pouring into us or filling into us in a way that we think that they should, just because we are not doing it for ourselves. If that person is supposed to do that for me, that's how relationships work. Yeah, when I'm down, you're just supposed to, I don't know, pick me up. Now I'm thinking of all of these different sayings that I usually hear in like support groups, right? Of different victim survivors really expressing the hardship of feeling so responsible for someone else's feelings, and then essentially someone's actions too, right? But because that person has not either had any intervention or been given any tools to regulate their own emotions and their own thoughts about the stressors that happen in their life, it then becomes pretty complicated to then be present with somebody else and then pour into a relationship as well, whether if that is with a romantic partner, whether if that is with family, if that is with friends, parents with children, that is kind of everywhere. But yeah, definitely with romantic relationships, for sure, for sure.
Awesome. So many things. I think self-care is something that I'm happy that it's becoming a topic. I feel like that we're hearing more about and people are talking more about. But it's the action behind that and how people are actually creating that space for themselves.
Mhm.
And to your point, really understanding that you can't pour from an empty cup and you really do have to take care of yourself first and foremost. So I think that's great. Um, you had made a comment earlier about people showing up in relationships differently. And so I wanted to ask you, and you can either, talk about maybe gender or maybe even racial, like stereotypes in romantic relationships and maybe some of the implications of things people experience because of that.
Mhm. Well, what I will say, um, hmm, so many things, right? So I would say, take a couple of seconds because I want this all to all come out right and not feel
Of
like I'm
course.
rambling. Um, But I guess where I wanted to start was one of the things I feel is expressed in is expressed a lot, specifically from Black women, is this idea of forced taming. And again, there are so many, I think, historical aspects that come with this, with just Black couples even having trouble and being at risk or in danger when trying to establish their relationships, right? Or trying to, you know, remain in relationships, be in relationships, and that dates all the way back to slavery. And so how Black people as a whole have adjusted to that, and the scripts that we've adopted as Black people in what I will say heteronormative relationships, has become, I would say, increasingly unique to navigate, I would say, compared to other relationships. So when I say forced teaming, I'm talking about that idea of just this really strong connection or this strong pressure to have to be a unit at all times, to be one at all times. So I don't know, I hear kind of the term ride or die happening in my head, right? But there's a lot that comes with that, right? Being someone's ride or die, or through thick and thin, that kind of then assumes that I need to be okay with everything, right? That happens in a relationship, or I can't go against the unit at all, or have my own thoughts, or have my own opinions or feelings. And I think we essentially then see this when violence occurs, because now you're having to weigh out what justice then looks like when harm has happened in those relationships as well. I think Black women, are already trying to conceptualize what that is going to look like, to even be believed as a survivor of domestic violence, right? What does that look like to get services? What is that going to look like when a first responder comes? Am I willing to even put my partner at risk for a greater consequence than maybe they would get compared to any sort of other counterpart when a first responder is on the scene, right? So am I willing to even risk that? And so that ends up just being really hard. I think just navigating just relationships in general, but also navigating relationships when harm has happened or violence has happened. I don't know, it creates a lot of different levels of complexity there. Sorry, and I want to go back to your question to make sure I'm answering it right. Well, did I miss a part?
No.
You also talked about gender.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm missing a part.
No, I think that's great. If you have a gender piece that you want to add, you're more than.
I can go on about gender all day too. I think how again, just how the scripts that we've adopted over time about gender is complicated for so many reasons. Again, because not every relationship is heteronormative, meaning between a cisgendered man and a cisgendered woman. So what does that mean to then have expectations or what we see as roles in relationships, when technically those ideas have not always applied to everyone. But if we are talking specifically about heteronormative relationships, again, a lot of the scripts that we've adopted create so many different layers and barriers for women and femme folks in relationships because of the different expectations that were of them, right? And that is not as a decision making body, as not the person who should have a say on how finances are spent, right? And so there's a really high percentage of women and feminine folks that experience financial abuse due to some of those scripts. We see it a lot in just how we think relationships should play out. Because I am the man and because you are the woman, these are the roles that we should have, or these are the responsibilities that you should have or not have, and this is what I should be able to do or not have to do. Just simply because of those gender roles or those gender scripts that we have. So so many different experiences. Does that feel okay for now? Because I want to respect your time.
No, I think that's great. That's
Okay.
I honestly feel like there's going to have to be like a part 2 for this.
Yeah, I would
I
love
think
that.
there's so much to talk about. So as we kind of near the end of our time, I want to give you the space to one, highlight a specific service or services that SAPEC offers for students that they can take advantage of, and then where to go to get more information about the services that SAPEC offers.
Perfect. So we have actually a lot of stuff coming up because April actually will start off or is recognized as Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So for the entire month of April, we will be promoting a lot of different campus activities, but also community activities. So hopefully students feel encouraged to either engage on campus or off of campus. So we have already published a calendar both on our website, and it's really, I think, circulating through a lot of different avenues as well, but folks are definitely able to follow us on social media, again, if they just need reminders of those events. Another thing that they can look out for are the flags that we will be displaying on the lawn of the Watkins Health Center. So we're going to be putting just a lot of flags there to honor victim survivors of sexual assault, and really just hold that space for folks who have experienced that, what that has meant for them, and what we as an institution want to do to be able to keep having conversations about prevention and education to create a safe space for students and faculty and staff. Another thing that folks can be looking for are we would like to start seeing nominations for our Men's Action Project. So that will be returning in the fall semester. So if anyone has come across a man or masculine identifying person who just has exemplified safety and or has maybe seen or had a passion for prevention or education and really wants to talk about what it means to be a man or masculine identifying person on campus and where their passions lie to create a safe space on campus in regards to sexual violence and sexual assault, we would love to have them. So it can come by nomination, or if someone wants to apply, we are accepting of either of those. And then one last plug that I think I want to definitely shout out is also Jayhawks Give a Flock, which will be coming back in the fall in person. So we're really excited to have that again. It has been a while since we've been able to do that in person. So unfortunately, we've missed out on some students that didn't get to have that experience, but for it to be back, we are really hoping for students who were able to remember the in-person experience to really definitely get their new members or their newer students or new teammates excited about that experience and that conversation, because it really can be powerful and set off the start to a really good year and good semester and just good school life here at the institution. So we'll be excited for that too. Yeah, I think that's all I can think of.
And shout out the social media handles.
If they want to follow our Facebook, they can add us at KU SAPEC. That's all lowercase. For our Twitter, they will do at KU_SAPEC. All of that is in caps. And then for our Instagram, we are at KU_SAPEC, and that is all lowercase.
That is great. This has been great, Taylor. Thank you so much for sharing a wealth of knowledge with us about healthy romantic relationships and how we can show up and best care for ourselves and others. We appreciate the work you're doing in this space and the impact you're making at KU and in the Lawrence community. As a reminder, we will launch Focus Friday sessions on the first and final Friday of each month. Each session will focus on a different topic, highlighting campus and community partners as part of our larger KU community. For more details about this session and future sessions can be found on our website at kualumni.org/student alumni network. Lastly, if you have any questions about the Focus Friday series, please do not hesitate to reach out by emailing us at kualumni@kualumni.org. Thanks again, and Rock Chalk.